Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to the third and final informational webinar session of the Opportunity Zones 2.0 series for the state of California. My name is Brian Coleman, and I am the Project Financing Manager with the Regional Economic Development Initiatives team at the Governor's Office of Business and Economic Development. If you joined us for one of our first two sessions, we want to welcome you back and thank you for continuing to be a part of this process. But if this is your first time joining us, we would like to extend a special welcome and thank you for taking the time to participate in this process as we move forward with this exciting opportunity. The purpose of these informational webinars is to provide timely and relevant information related to OC 2.0. But we also hope that you come away with a stronger understanding of how you can utilize this incentive to accomplish a wide range of economic development objectives in your communities. Also hoping that that our guest speakers will the insights that our guest speakers will be sharing will be valuable in helping to select the most optimal census tracts for recommending to our office. But let's go ahead and go to the next slide, Tracy. But before we dive into the agenda, I do want to cover a few quick housekeeping items. So first, audio and chat features have been deactivated for all attendees to ensure no disruption in the flow of the agenda. So if you do have any questions, you're encouraged to use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen, and we will do our best to address questions in the order that they are received. Any questions that we are unable to answer during the webinar will be included in the FAQ document that will be posted on our website following the webinar series. And then we will be sharing a link in the chat to a web form where you can post questions for our team, and that web form will remain available after the webinar for any additional questions or follow-up comments. And then as a quick reminder, the today's session is being recorded and will be posted to the GO-Biz YouTube channel for later viewing. If you were unable to attend either of the first two sessions, the recordings are available on our YouTube channel, and we will go ahead and share the links in the chat shortly. All right, so here's agenda or little overview of the webinar session for today. We do have a lighter agenda for today's webinar compared to our first two sessions, but we are excited to have joining us Brett Theodos, who is the director of the Center for Local Finance and Growth at the Urban Institute. Brett is a nationally recognized expert in mission-driven finance, place-based economic development, and wealth building strategies. Throughout his career, he has helped shape innovative policies and investment approaches that have expanded economic opportunities for communities across the country. And during today's session, Brett will be providing an overview of the Urban Institute's Opportunity Zones 2026 selection tool, which was developed to help identify and evaluate census tracts for that might be eligible for the OC 2.0 program, or that are eligible for the OC 2.0 program and might be optimal for recommending to the state. And this tool can assist local leaders in identifying census tracts with high significant community need as well as strong potential for future investment. And then similar to the last two webinars following Brett's presentation, I will provide a recap of how the state will be evaluating and selecting census tracts for OC 2.0 nomination. And then I will also provide a brief recap of how local jurisdictions can participate in the process by submitting recommendations to our office for consideration. Next slide, please. Alrighty, so with that, I'll go ahead and pass it over to Brett, and he'll go ahead and give his overview of the selection tool. So, Brett, the floor is yours.
Thanks so much, Brian. Good to be with you. Thank you all for joining. Look forward to as engaging a session as we can have with me doing most of the talking. So encouragement to please put your questions, comments into the Q&A box, and we will do our best to draw them in. So as Brian mentioned, we've been doing a lot of research around opportunity zones. We have for a number of years, really going back even to the very beginning before the beginning. We've been tracking this, but we know that this is a pivotal moment, and we are moving forward to another round of selections. So the last time this happened really quickly, and jurisdictions didn't have a lot of awareness about how opportunities were going to work. And so we have a lot more that we know now. And yet there's also still a lot of blank spots in our knowledge. So, for example, what we don't know is where projects went in the first round, or even what they went for. I mean, we know anecdotes, both good and bad, but we don't know things that are systematic, that are representative. So what I'll be talking here today is a bit of an insight around that, and I'm excited to dig in with you. So let's go to the next slide. Okay, why Ohio? Well, some states don't have income taxes, right? They're not taxing capital gains. So those ones are not very helpful to us at the present moment. Some states do, but you don't have to submit any information about what you're claiming at the state level. Some states collect that information, but they don't do anything with it. That whittles us down to only one state where they have a conforming tax incentive to the federal OZs, right? The state tax regime looks like the federal, and you can get the state OZ incentive, in quotes, because you got the federal one. As many of you know, right, California doesn't, didn't couple in that way. New York did, but then elected to reverse it, and some states never have. Ohio has, and they collect data as part of that process, and they are willing to share that data. So in only one state in the union, we can actually look at both where opportunity zone investment went and what it went for. And you might be asking yourself, why do I care about Ohio? I'm not living in Ohio or seeking to invest in Ohio. But the answer is this is the best / only information that we have in a systematic way to understand investor preferences and behavior. And so we have, previewing to the end, taken and adapted that learning to your context in the way that we best can. So that's the preview of why I am going to show you data about Ohio, even though it's not your state, and why we are going to think about then how to apply it in your context. So next slide. Okay. So the first thing that I'm trying to communicate, and we've met with governor's offices in a lot of states at this point, and as I communicate to city leaders and county leaders, philanthropy, investors, et cetera, is this is not the if you build it, he will come field of dreams type program, right? So there are loads, more than 8,700 eligible zones in the first round. There'll be fewer this time because of some rule changes, but still a lot of communities, census tracts, are selected as zones. And so the question is, how many are getting investment, right? Just because you're designated a zone, did you get investment? Not necessarily is the answer. So the first thing to anchor in mind is only 1/3 of Ohio's zones got investment in the years that we were looking at. And we don't have the full-time series based on the data the state collects, but the point will still hold that a minority of places are getting investment. And even that investment, as we'll see in a minute, is pretty concentrated. So like it or dislike it, the reality is being designated a zone does not guarantee you a dime. It doesn't mean that a single project will come to your community. This is still very much an investor-driven incentive, and investors will be putting their money in the projects and parcels, properties that they want to, and picking a zone that is not attractive to investors, sadly, still means zero investment. So that's that blue 220 tracks. And so that's the first thing, just emotionally and intellectually, to get our heads around, is that this doesn't guarantee anything. And so part of the process that states are needing to go through is, what are places that are going to end up in the green, not the blue, because it doesn't do the state a lot of good to make selections that don't have any real attractiveness to investors. Now, in a future round, we can change how OZs look and work, but at present, this is what we have. And so states need to enter in with the understanding of where investors are willing to put their money. And we'll talk about some of that. I'm sure many of you have firsthand experience in that, but we'll talk about that with some data in mind. Okay, so then we had the subset of tracts that got investment, that 108. Very interesting and something that needs more attention. 29% of investment went to non-designated tracts. And that's confusing because there is the 90% test, right? But that's more than 10% that's residual, that's not, going into zones. So I'm not sure what's going on there. Maybe across states they're averaging out to that. Maybe there's some misreporting. Maybe not. Either way, we don't know. But that is something to keep in mind too, is there is opportunity zone investing happening outside of designated zones, and a certain amount of that is allowable. Probably not this amount, but a certain amount. Okay, let's go next slide. All right, so among places that got investment, how did that distribution work and look? So it was very lumpy, right? So 9 single census tracts, 9 zones within the state of Ohio got, a majority plus, right, of investment. And then the next 319 tracts got the investment that you're seeing there. And so this can be very, very lumpy, right? I know of an investor that did a $200 million OZ project, not necessarily here, but in a industrial park area, right? But also you can, and we saw in the data, you can do an OZ project for 5 figures, right? Single family or small multifamily, right? So the range of project sizes was very much evident in the Ohio data. And here you can see really significant differentials. And so when you're thinking about the census tracts and what's getting designated as a zone, it's not really just a test of, did you get a dollar? Are you in the, yes or the no category with respect to investment? It's also a matter how much, because some of these tracts got very little investment and some got big dollops. And so that's part of what is important to keep in mind, is really just choose a little bit more of a researcher term, the very skewed distribution of where investment is going. So this is something that we've picked up anecdotally, but it's much more verified here in the Ohio data. Okay, next slide. So where specifically did that investment go? So we had address information, we tagged it on to place. So let's start at the top. So here we just scale it as a share of population based on what would be expected. If every kind of per capita place based on designation got its expected amount. And what we see in Ohio is actually what's been verified through some of the Treasury and joint tax reporting for the whole US of A. They had access to microdata. Is that rural areas are underperforming. They're not getting their fair share of investment. And again, we might want to prioritize them for investment. And this current iteration of opportunity zones looks different for rural. I'm sure you guys are tracking that, but there are some extras added on to rural, really in recognition of what this finding demonstrates, which is that rural areas are underperforming. They're less attractive to investors than kind of their pro rata share would imply. Now, you might think that because rural areas were deprioritized, well, maybe micropolitan, like small city areas, would get more. Actually, no, even more so than rural, 12, 13% if we look at projects or dollar counts, um, underperforming relative to what one might expect. So it's not that small cities did well in Ohio. Okay, so then you might think the real answer is, and believe me, we did these cuts a lot of ways. The real answer is that, well, then metropolitan areas overperformed. And the answer is not necessarily. So even that is a more nuanced story. So Akron underperformed, Cincy under, Dayton under, Toledo under, Youngstown under. So who overperformed? Well, just two places within the state. So the first is Columbus, which is a growing area, and so we can talk about appreciation in a minute, but that is obviously part of the attraction there. And then Cleveland. And Cleveland is less so growing, but it did have a number of industrial activities that are going on there. So in terms of where investment is going, you can also see it's not just that all zones are getting it, but it's not all corners of the state, right? Certain places that have some market fundamentals are where investors are much more putting their investment. Okay, next slide. All right, so that's the where. Now we're going to talk a little bit more about the what. So we had to do a lot of work to find out what these projects were. We only had addresses. We had to look up web searches and pull secondary data and building permits and, Google Street Views, right? All sorts of things to try to tag what these projects became over time. And so this is a representative picture. So first off, almost all of it's real estate, and we know that to be the case nationally. There is very little operating business, kind of not real estate investing going on in this program. So that's just the first for a range of dimensions. Just thinking of this as a real estate program, very much verified here in the Ohio data. And then what types of real estate are getting produced? So it's, we're talking 2/3 residential inclusive of mixed use. And so majority is multifamily, and that's certainly something we're picking up more anecdotally, but verified here. And then there actually really is an intriguing, to me, amount of the program that has been used for single family. Now, it's only 3% of dollars, though it is a larger share of projects. So that's implying, of course, these are small projects. It's intriguing because there already is a cap gain exemption for owner occupants, right? So these aren't owner occupants. These are investor-owned single-family properties, and they do require the substantial rehab, right? But we are picking it up that a number of projects are happening in that space. They're small, much smaller than the multifamily, less visible in community areas. Sometimes this is infill development. Sometimes this is taking a single unit and making it into duplex or triplex or what have you. You can kind of see the street fill in a bit, but certainly that is a use case that we are seeing. So residential, again, the modal use, the median project is going to be a multifamily development with some single family sprinkled in, and then mixed use with some commercial and residential. We do have about 1/5 of projects that are exclusively tagged as commercial, another 1/10 or so, a little less, depending for project counts or dollars, that are industrial. And then we have others that are still real estate, but a variety of different use cases. So this conveys, when you think about if your community is picked, what are you going to get? And here is the dimensionality that we are seeing emerge in Ohio. Okay, next slide. All right, we then went ahead and actually got the rents that were charged for the properties that were being rented out. So the actual properties. So not just data about the census tract, but the actual properties. And we tagged the rent in the properties to the relative rent of that surrounding zone. And what's emerging is a picture of most of the projects delivering at the 100% of the median rent or more than 120% of the median rent. Very few properties that were renting, in the bottom half, for example, of rent to for the project to the median. We did this at every number of bedroom counts separately, so trying to put some rigor to this. And this probably also doesn't surprise you based on the reporting, probably based on what many of you have done. But that is to say, for the very most part, OZs are producing market rate rental housing. That's, again, the kind of the modal or even the median project that we're seeing. That was picked up in Ohio. Next slide. Okay, so that's enough about Ohio. Now we're going to talk about how we have attempted to make this even more useful to you. So we're talking about zone selection and trying to inform selection. So let's go one more slide. So we built a tool. That tool models where future OZ investment is likely based on the data we have, which is imperfect and incomplete, very well admitted. Nevertheless, it's the best we have to try to predict which eligible census tracts are most likely to attract investment. We try to predict which ones are less likely to attract investment. We also bring in another dimension, which is zones that we think could be very likely to attract investment, but for which we don't see much social purpose or mission or need. For example, they're already very highly invested places. They may qualify because of some dimension, but they're already very highly invested or have higher incomes or student populations, what have you. So we have been talking and framing this as making the best Goldilocks choice that you can make. So even if we want to be deeply, go for deep impact and go to the most disinvested zones, this just isn't the tool for that. We can change the tool, we can use other tools, but this isn't going to achieve that result, unfortunately. Conversely, states selecting, I think something on the order of a quarter of New York State's zones are in Brooklyn right now, like kind of what about upstate, right? And so every state's different in terms of its dynamics, but that is to say, how do we find that Goldilocks spot of like, there's some ability and willingness for the investors to come in and use this tool, and there's some measure of social or missional purpose or need. And how big that Goldilocks intersection is a question, and where exactly you'd situate it on the continuum. We probably have hundreds of different answers on this webinar, but that is to say, it's the framework that I'd ask us, intellectual framework that I'd ask us to bring to this is where are investors willing to come with using this tool, and where is there a good measure of social need or purpose? And that hopefully will guide your thinking about where you would like to nominate investors to go based on the zone selection that the state can make. Okay, let's go one more. So how did we produce these data? So we just threw a bunch of stuff against the wall and tried to see what predicted where investment in Ohio went. And I didn't put the data up, but it is really striking. And we have this in our research briefs, which I link to at the end. The zones that got investment looked very, very different pre-designation from the zones that did not get investment. So this is not a treatment effect. This is not an impact of opportunity zones. Even back to 2017, before designations, the places that would get designated as zones, those that got investment and those that didn't, look very different. And so, for example, places that got investment, they were different in level and in trajectory. And so we are asking you to keep in mind both level and trajectory as you think about what is happening in a place. And both of those are important because they convey something about the potential trajectory of the neighborhood. And so we are, some of this is hard, right, to predict in advance. It is certainly hard for us to predict in advance, being at some distance from you. But it is to say it's important to try to think like the market thinks when you're trying to put through something in place. So just to give you a little parameters of the data points for Ohio, for example, um, one metric to look at might be population, right? So in the run up to designation, that is right before designation, this is not an impact of the program itself. Tracts that got investment gained 8% in population. Tracts that were designated zones that did not get investment lost 3%. So you can see even in the run up, they're moving separately. The other thing that really stands out to me, when we look at, for example, incomes, there was a 30% gain in income, median income, in tracts that were designated as zones in Ohio that got investment. There was a negative 2% income change in zones that didn't get investment. Again, in the run up to designation. And so you can see these places are really moving in different ways in terms of where it's getting and not getting. And the same story emerges for rent. It emerges absolutely in that profound way when we look at home values. A lot of these things begin to move together. But levels already also mattered, right? And so we had, already a 10, 20% higher level, even as of the most recent period in rents. We had 2.5x the home values in zones that were getting investment versus zones that didn't. And the other big dimension to keep in mind is the number of jobs, right? So we had about 4 to 5x the number of jobs located within census tracts that got investment versus those that didn't. And so these are more commercialized areas. They have more density. They have more multifamily housing is another thing that popped up, right? The home ownership rate in zones that got investment was appreciably lower than was the home ownership rate was lower in zones that got investment, right? These are more multifamily and more rental neighborhoods. And that's the characteristic of where most of the OZ money is going. So we took those attributes to try to model where this is going for and what it's going to. And what we saw there is, these attributes standing out as among the most important in predicting investment. So again, we're trying to predict based on pre-2017 values where money went. And now we're taking those same attributes from pre-2026, 2025 attributes based on the most recent current data that we could get and trying to predict what investment looks like, would look like going forward. Again, imperfect in a whole variety of ways, but better than nothing, we hope. Okay, let's go one more slide. All right, so we did that, and we segmented neighborhoods into these, this trilogy, this kind of 3 options of categories. Tripartite, that's the word I was looking for. Okay, so we had those that are more likely to attract OZ investment, those that are likely, we said, to attract capital even without designation. So that is the pink in this map, and those that were less likely to attract investment. We did this nationally. We did not limit it to a certain geography because a whole geography could be more or less likely to attract investment. Designation obviously is ring-fenced within states, but after that comes down and investors can move wherever they want. They don't have to be in a state because they're from that state. So we wanted to model this on a nationwide basis. So here's Chicago. We'll show you another map next. So this is West Virginia, and what's striking to me on this map is you're not seeing the pink. You're not even seeing loads of green. You're really seeing a lot of yellow. And so that conveys something about the lack of appreciation that's gone on in this state, the lack of higher incomes at both level and trajectory. Certainly, there's more rural dimension here, which is bound up in some of those things. So that is West Virginia. And here is Brooklyn. So kind of a different picture that's emerging a whole lot of pink. So a lot of spots in Brooklyn already attracting loads of capital fail to see how a tool like opportunity zones is needed to mobilize that fundamentally. Investors could be very happy to be there. Don't misunderstand. We're just saying that the social mission or purpose is not clearly met in terms of additionality, in terms of substitution, in terms of moving money into places that it otherwise would not be interested in. But there are some greens that emerge and some yellows that are there too. Okay, so I did also clip the map for California. This is zoomable, clickable on our website, linked in a minute. You can pick any state that you want and look at our categorization in terms of, more or less, and likely to get there anyways. Different color scheme just to trip you up, but you get the point. And then I clipped it a little closer to zoom in a little bit more on the LA metro area. Obviously, you have a big state there, but you can begin to look. And then we actually also have the data for download, so you could get attributes across these dimensions and other economic and demographic and social dimensions for every census tract. And so you can begin to characterize how your place looks in specific. So again, this is modeled data based on only one state, Ohio, based on a previous version of the incentives. So they've changed, a number of things, especially for rural. So I don't assert that the map will look exactly like this way, but I would say encouragement to think in this context and frame, and really to anchor your expectations around opportunity zones based on the expectations and demonstrated actions of investors. And so that's what we have tried to model out here. So let's go to the next slide. And so I'm beginning to wrap, so please put in Q&A and we can try to fold that in. But some takeaways, some implications that I'd like to lift up for your next round of zone selection. The first, reiterating, as we saw in Ohio, plan for real estate. That's what this tool is oriented to. It's fundamentally what it's going to produce. Nothing as yet, I think, in the next iteration is going to fundamentally shift that. And so given that, you need to think about, as you're thinking about zone selection, you need to think about, where do I want market rate housing, commercial development, and where would that serve community needs well? So not as much where is affordable housing needed per se, unless it's more kind of that mid-level naturally occurring affordable housing, NOAA. But where is market rate housing or near market rate housing and commercial, maybe a bit of industrial development needed? I would say I would encourage you, as you're thinking about zone selection, to think about land use in a more granular way. And so by that, what I mean is if governors are wanting to prioritize, let's say, job outcomes, well, then they might try to pick tracts that were zoned more for industrial type purposes or commercial purposes or near rail spurs or highways or central business districts or what have you, job centers. But if they wanted to prioritize more housing outcomes, they might pick tracts that are zoned more for residential use, especially if there was some multifamily dimensionality to that. And while land use can change, it changes slowly. And so I would encourage us to think more about the land use composition of a zone as actually a way to lead and guide what kinds of opportunity zone investment we're going to get and create. So it's the intersection of all of these things. It's not just the zone attributes, it's the parcel attributes that add up. Second is, again, to try to think in a Goldilocks framework. So I'm not asserting that we have gotten the designations right, the cut points, the drivers, and that to me is a little less the point than the point that you begin thinking in that framework of, is this area realistically going to attract investment or not? Does this area need a help, a boost to investment or not? And so bringing that framework to your choices, I think will help, even if we get the tailoring, the science, the modeling not exactly right for your place. And there could be any number of reasons why we get it off for a particular place. And so again, not fundamentally wanting to assert that we have modeled this correctly as much as we've modeled this. Hopefully it helps you. And even more than that, take the paradigm and use it and apply it. Next frame, as one thing to avoid, is around displacement, both residential and I would submit also at the small business level. So places that are already rapidly appreciating in terms of rents or home values, seeing incomes goes up, beware. Beware about adding an opportunity zone designation to that community. Now, more often I would say opportunity zone capital follow rather than leads in terms of a driver of displacement, but still not adding on to that. And as we saw in Ohio, tracks with investment having incomes going up, on the order of, we're talking 30% even before designation, whereas those that didn't going down 2%. So investors are very oriented towards the appreciation, given the permanent exclusion in capital gains tax on new gains, right? So it makes absolute fundamental sense with how this tool is designed. It is a tool that rewards appreciation. But that means governors have to be the backstop to make sure that we aren't picking places to the best of their knowledge that are about to, or even beginning, or have begun a rapid appreciation context, because that is not the sort of dimension that will be benefiting long-term residents. And the point that I wanted to wrap here on was the importance of local knowledge and your insights about what's planned and upcoming in terms of investment or infrastructure. So we've modeled this based on things like home values and income change and what have you, mortgage lending, right? But what we can't see is, that transit line is going to open a new station here in this tract, or, that freeway is going to add an off-ramp or on-ramp, or, that stadium is going to move here, or some other dimension, right? That big factory or complex is going to deliver, and that's going to affect the surrounding areas. And so we modeled this based on secondary data that we can grab, and not just census stuff, but a number of sources, including, information about where investment is going. But what we can't see that you may well know based on your local knowledge is what's coming. And of course, investors are responding to the real world, not our modeled data. So that's just to say, I subset all of these recommendations by local knowledge. And again, we may have miscategorized, but the point is, you will know what area has latent or actual market demand from investors. You will know what the land use is, current or upcoming, in terms of zoning changes. You will know about planned investment or infrastructure that's going to be delivered that actually could affect demand, not for that parcel, but for adjoining or surrounding ones. And so that really needs to filter in at every turn, is what we're looking at and seeing in terms of it. And the same in reverse, right? If a project looked good on our scale just because a place looked good because it had a big thing deliver, but that was a one-off, and that doesn't reflect fundamental market strength, like that may be over-indexed. So all that to say, You're probably more right than we are, but hope it's still helpful as a means of predicting based on what we can serve, where investors would find attractive and where there's social need, and hoping you can take that construct and go forth and prosper along the way. So happy to share our resources. This interactive tool exists on the website. We have tract level data that you can pull it down, and we have a landing page with scores of different research reports, publicly available data, congressional testimony, public comments, letters, event recordings, and the like that you can dig into for more. So that is it. That is my wrap, and I will bring Ryan back online.
Yeah, thank you so much, Brett. That was a really awesome presentation and overview of your selection tool. And although you noted that, this tool is imperfect, I do think it really could is still a valuable resource for local jurisdictions to utilize to identify zones that may be most optimal for designation. And so we definitely want to encourage local jurisdictions to use the tool to their best advantage as they're identifying census tracts to recommend to our office. And really appreciate you highlighting that takeaway at the end that local jurisdictions should be really uh, strategic and cognizant about identifying census tracts that already have public investment directed towards it and really leaning in. That's really the intent of our process here at GO-Biz with having this recommendation process from local jurisdictions. We don't have all the knowledge and insights on the ground, so we're really leaning on all of you attendees on the call, local government leaders and economic development practitioners to identify those tracks that have large scale projects, activities planned that may potentially be attractive for future private investment from OC investors. So really appreciate you highlighting that takeaway, Brett. We do actually have a number of questions in the Q&A chat. I was hoping you could maybe address one of them verbally. Someone posted, OC 1.0 favored residential projects. Is this anticipated to change for OC 2.0? Wondering if you can share any insights on that.
Great, great set of questions that are emerging. I mean, the best answer is no one knows. The second best answer is I don't expect a load of change. So the rural dimension is one to keep an eye on. And, do we see a bifurcation of investor behavior where some people are going for more stable and guaranteed returns, right? The temporary deferral and the step up in basis, I'm assuming people are already read into how OZs works, but if not, there's a load of resources we can share about that. But all that to say, is there kind of more a fixed kind of low risk, low return dimension that emerges, and then those seeking the higher yield that's going for the permanent exclusion? I think that's an open question. But there's every reason to anticipate real estate to be a pretty big use case. I mean, one is simply compliance, right? Where are you going to be able to qualify? It's based on a geography, and firms can move, right? Certainly they can go out of business more than real estate projects have. And also it's this 10-year hold, right? And then there's just a number of other kind of financial legal attributes that fold in. So there's every anticipation that this will again be a majority, super majority real estate program, and really residential as being a highest use. I mean, even apart from OZs, that's what we're building right now, right? Like that in data centers. If you look at these things kind of go in waves, right? You had self-storage for a time that was an asset class, right? There's not saying it slightly differently, we're in a low growth era as a country, right? We're not having baby booms, we're not having loads of immigrants, so there are very few asset classes that are growing. Senior housing will be one as the baby boom ages. So all that to say, as we think about OZs, I most often like to think, what is the private market interested in delivering, period? Not but for OZs, but just what is the private market doing? Because OZs are just that little bit of incentive added on top to give you preferential return for, the cap gains for the equity part of the project. But if you're layering in, commercial debt or any debt from any number of sources, like it's not per se that it's an OZ project the way you might have a low income housing tax credit project. It's to say you have a commercial real estate project, multifamily real estate project, and some of that equity is OZ equity. So, all that long way to say no one can say for sure, and yet I also expect and predict that most of this would be real estate and most of this would be residential.
Wonderful. Appreciate you sharing those insights, Brett. All right, we do have a number of questions left. I think in the interest of time, we're going to go ahead and move on with the rest of the agenda. And Brett's happy to answer any questions in order as we wrap up this webinar. And then as a reminder, if you do have any questions for Brett or our team, feel free to drop it in the Q&A function. If we can't get to them during this session, we will include them in our FAQ document, which will be posted on the website after this webinar. All right. Well, thank you so much, Brett. Really appreciate that awesome overview. All right. So wonderful. Okay. Thank you, Tracy. So yeah. So just if you attended our previous webinars, you'll know that we wrap up each webinar with a little recap of the upcoming selection process framework for the state of California. Um, just as a reminder, the information that is being shared in these informational webinar sessions is intended to serve as a high-level overview of the state's upcoming selection process. And really the goal is to help local jurisdictions and community partners begin thinking strategically about which census tracts may be the strongest candidates for OC designation. But as another reminder, we do plan on hosting a series of office hour sessions over the coming weeks to review the selection process and recommendation, local jurisdiction recommendation process in greater detail. And we'll answer questions from attendees, interested nominators during those office hour sessions. And those dates and times and registration information will be included on our webpage as well. But just as a quick little recap of the upcoming timeline for the state's OC 2.0 process over the coming months. Over the next coming weeks throughout the remainder of the month of June. We are going to be hosting those office hour sessions again on a weekly basis. Very likely, they will be every Tuesday for over the next couple of weeks. And again, the date and registration links for those office hours will be posted on our webpage, and we'll be sending them out in the GO-Biz newsletters and announcements. One particularly new update regarding the timeline compared to our previous webinar sessions is that we actually do have a more definitive timeline for when local communities may submit census tract recommendations to our office for consideration for state nomination to the U.S. Treasury. So the application period will officially open on June 15th, and it will remain open until the end of July. So, as local jurisdictions, you will have approximately 6 to 7 weeks to identify census tracts and submit them to our office for nomination. So, June 15th is when we will officially open up the application window. And as a reminder, this isn't a first come, first serve type of scenario. So just because you submit earlier in the process doesn't mean the census tract, the nominated census tract will be viewed more favorably or give preference. So we do want to encourage you, if you need to take that, take as much time as you need to through that application window to identify the most optimal competitive census tracts in your jurisdictions to submit to us and really be cognizant about choosing which ones you think will be those quote unquote Goldilocks census tracts for nomination. But the application window will be open for about a 6 to 7 week period until the end of July. And then it is still our intention to accept formal census tract recommendations from local government entities. So cities, counties, special districts, regional joint powers authorities, councils of governments, and similar public agencies will be able to formally submit census tract recommendations to our office for nomination. So if you are another local organization, such as an educational institution, a community group, a local economic development organization, or a private developer, and you're interested in recommending a census tract for OC 2.0 designation, we do encourage you to coordinate directly with your local government partners regarding the submission process. Ultimately, we want this to be a collaborative process where local government agencies are engaging with community partners to identify the census tracts in their communities that are most optimal for recommending to the state for nomination. Um, and then as a reminder, we do plan on setting up an online portal or a web-based submission form for local jurisdictions to submit census tract recommendations. We are still finalizing all the information that will be gathered in this web form, but as a minimum, we do anticipate requesting basic information such as the nominating jurisdiction. So is it a city or county nominating the census tract or recommending the census tract for nomination? A formal primary point of contact at the jurisdiction that we can follow up with if we need to, the 10-digit census tract number, and during those office hours, we'll be providing information on how you can identify the census tract number for the for the area that you're looking to recommend to the state. And then likely there will just be brief responses, brief questions, asking, how the tract aligns with the state's investment and economic development priorities. It's not our intent to make the nomination process very extensive. We want to make it as simple, streamlined as possible. And then following the submission period, the state, we do anticipate spending the month of August and first part of September evaluating and scoring census tract recommendations, with final nominations expected to be submitted to the U.S. Treasury by September 28th. So the governor's office will submit the state's recommended nominations to the U.S. Treasury by September 20th, or at least before the September 28th federal deadline. Can we go to the next slide, please? All right, so just as a little recap of the census tracts that California attends, or the criteria that California intends to prioritize for choosing which census tracts that we want to nominate from local recommendations. Again, we want these census tracts to align with statewide and regional economic development objectives. So some of the things that we are encouraging local jurisdictions to keep in mind and when they submit census tract recommendations to our office is, does the census tract advance the Jobs First regional plans or the statewide economic blueprints? So are there, real estate projects, economic development activities, business activity that supports the strategic industry sectors identified in the Jobs First statewide economic blueprint or the regional Job First or the local Jobs First regional plan. So alignment with the Jobs First economic development priorities. We also want to prioritize census tracts that have potential to attract private investment into residential housing and in particular affordable housing objectives that align with the that align with local regional housing needs assessments or RENA goals. So as Brett mentioned in his presentation, this has been a tool that has heavily been directed towards residential development. So we want to encourage local jurisdictions to identify census tracts that do have planned residential development. If there's an affordable housing component to it, those will likely be viewed more favorably by the state. Also, we're likely to favor census tracts that include shovel-ready sites that are defined by the state's business ready sites tool. So this doesn't necessarily mean that a shovel-ready site has to be listed on the state's business ready sites tool, but we do want to prioritize census tracts that align with that definition. So these would be like census tracts that are already permitted, already entitled, have the ability to attract commercial industrial development. And we will be providing additional clarification on what shovel-ready sites meet the business-ready sites definition. So that information will be provided in additional detail during the office hours and later on in written material posted to our website. And then finally, any census tracts that demonstrate uh, public investment or planned public investment within the census tract. So the census tract is receiving federal, state, local grant funding, or if there's local public funding being directed towards infrastructure improvement, or if it's located within like a tax increment financing district. Those tracts will be viewed more favorably by our office. The logic being if there's already public investment being directed towards the census tract, it's likely to attract additional private OC investment. So again, we want to encourage local jurisdictions to keep all these priorities in mind when determining which census tracts to recommend to the state for consideration. And then also communities should consider things like, is there a pipeline of development projects within the tract? Is there also ongoing business or economic development activity occurring that's likely to attract additional activity? And then naturally, is there any potential for future job creation, housing development, or infrastructure investment and business expansion within the census tract? Again, this is as Brett mentioned, the opportunity zone incentive is driven by private investment decisions, and investors will naturally be looking for areas where they see strong long-term growth potential with achievable project outcomes and lower investment risk. And so, if communities can demonstrate local support and if they have a clear vision for economic growth, these will likely be in a much stronger position to attract future private capital investment and will be viewed more favorably by the state. Next slide, please. Okay, so I do want to reiterate that additional details regarding the submission process, our evaluation criteria, as well as procedures for local jurisdictions to recommend census tracts will continue to be shared in the coming weeks during our office hours. So communities will have some time to gather the information needed to prepare their recommendations for submission on our online portal. But in the meantime, we do want to encourage everyone to visit the dedicated Opportunity Zones 2.0 webpage on the GO-Biz website. This webpage will serve as the central hub for future webinar announcements, as well as program updates, guidance materials, and additional resources to the state's OC 2.0 process. And then we also want to encourage you to subscribe to the various GO-Biz newsletters if you haven't done so already. Um, the subscription information to those newsletters are available through the same website. Future announcements and updates regarding the state selection process will be distributed through those channels as well. All right. And so, as a reminder, today's webinar recording will be posted to the GO-Biz YouTube channel. So attendees can revisit this presentation or share it with any colleagues who may have been unable to attend today's sessions. And then those links will also be posted directly on the OC 2.0 webpage as well. Next slide, please. All right. So with that, I think we can go ahead and adjourn this session. We want to sincerely thank you all again for taking the time to join us today, and I want to extend a special thank you to Brett for that awesome presentation on the Urban Institute selection tool. And again, if anybody has any additional information or any additional questions or seeking additional information, we encourage you to reach out through our OZ 2.0 webpage. And yeah, again, we appreciate you all taking time joining us today. We appreciate your partnership and engagement, and hope to see you all on future sessions, office hour sessions. So thank you, everyone. Have a good rest of your week.